Family, let me tell you something. Life has a way of putting us in situations where we question our worth, where we question if we're enough, and where we wonder why the people we've given our all to can't seem to see the treasure that God placed inside of us. But here's the truth. Becoming mentally strong isn't about proving yourself to anybody else. It's about standing in the identity God already gave you. You don't beg for what you were born with. You don't chase what should recognize you. And you don't shrink just because someone refuses to acknowledge your light. God didn't create you to beg for love, attention, or respect. He created you to walk in it boldly. Stop measuring your worth by other people's response to you. That's the first step in becoming mentally strong, because too many of us have built our entire identity around how people clap for us, how they treat us, and how much they validate us. But what happens when the applause stops? What happens when the very people you thought would cheer you on turn silent? If you're not careful, you'll start to believe that their silence means you've lost value. You'll start to think that because they didn't respond to you, something must be wrong with you. But let me shift your perspective. Your worth was never designed to be measured by human hands. God already spoke over you before you even took your first breath. He said you were fearfully and wonderfully made. He said you were chosen, set apart, called for such a time as this. And yet here we are, allowing people who don't even know their own worth to dictate how we feel about ours. When you keep looking for approval in the wrong places, you end up begging for scraps of love, attention, and respect. You settle for relationships that drain you instead of pour into you. You tolerate environments that diminish you instead of elevate you. And over time, you start confusing their rejection with God's reflection. You think that because they don't see you, you must not be worth seeing. But family, can I tell you the truth? Their inability to recognize your value doesn't decrease your value. It just reveals their blindness. Mental strength is built when you stop outsourcing your self-worth. You stop waiting for someone to validate the greatness you carry, and you start standing tall in the reality that you were validated by heaven long before you ever needed an earthly confirmation. Because the danger of constantly chasing approval is that you'll never feel settled. One day they'll love you, the next day they'll leave you. And if your self-esteem is built on their opinion, your emotions will always be on a roller coaster. But when you learn to anchor your worth in God's truth, you stop being tossed by people's moods, their seasons, and their issues. You stop asking, do they like me? And start declaring, God loves me. You stop asking, am I enough for them? And start declaring, I am more than enough in Him. That's what mental strength looks like. It's refusing to negotiate your worth with people who didn't pay the price for your soul. See, the enemy wants you desperate. He wants you thinking you've got to beg for the bare minimum, beg for their call, beg for their time, beg for their respect. But God didn't design you to beg. He designed you to walk with authority, knowing that you don't have to chase what He already ordained. You don't have to shrink yourself to be loved. You don't have to dilute yourself to be accepted. You don't have to perform to be respected. When you stop measuring your worth by their response, you give yourself permission to step into your full power. You give yourself the freedom to say, if they don't clap, I'll clap for myself. If they don't see me, God still sees me. If they don't respect me, I respect myself. That's the shift. That's the moment you stop being controlled by external approval and start living from internal conviction. Mental strength begins when you learn to embrace solitude without fear. Some of the hardest seasons in life are the ones where you feel like nobody gets you, nobody checks on you, and nobody seems to be standing beside you. It feels like silence is the loudest sound in the room. And if you're not careful, you'll misinterpret solitude as rejection. You'll start thinking, I must not be lovable. I must not be worthy. I must not be enough because nobody is here. But what if solitude wasn't a punishment? What if solitude was actually God's classroom? We live in a culture that glorifies noise, connection, and attention. Everywhere you look, people are measuring themselves by followers, likes, or who they're connected to. And in that environment, solitude feels foreign, even frightening. But sometimes God will pull you away from the crowd because he knows your spirit can't grow in noise. He knows you'll never learn his voice if you're addicted to theirs. So he silences the room, not to break you, but to build you. Solitude is where you learn the difference between loneliness and being alone. Loneliness is the ache of feeling unseen, but being alone with God is the gift of realizing you are fully known. Loneliness tells you you're abandoned, but solitude with God reminds you that you're chosen. Loneliness wants you to chase validation, but solitude teaches you to rest in identity. The enemy wants you to fear solitude because he knows it's the place where your strength multiplies. When you learn to embrace solitude, you stop grasping for people who can't even carry what you're asking them to hold. You stop chasing after relationships just to fill a void. You stop begging for attention that was never going to satisfy you anyway. Instead, you start finding peace in your own presence. You start realizing that your worth isn't tied to who calls, who texts, or who notices. Your worth is tied to who God says you are, and his presence is enough to sustain you in every season. Think about it. Jesus himself modeled solitude. Before major moments in his ministry, he withdrew to lonely places to pray. He didn't run to the crowd, he ran to his Father. He knew that true power isn't found in being surrounded, but in being surrendered. And if Jesus needed solitude to realign and strengthen himself, how much more do we? But the problem is we run from it. We fill every quiet moment with noise, with distraction, with scrolling, with anything that keeps us from sitting with ourselves. Yet in that solitude, God shows you things about yourself that you couldn't see when you were busy performing for others. He shows you the wounds you've been ignoring, the patterns you've been repeating, the lies you've been believing. It's uncomfortable, yes, but it's also liberating. Because you can't heal what you keep hiding, and you can't grow if you keep running. Solitude strips away the audience so God can deal with the real you. Mental strength requires that you stop fearing those moments where it's just you and God. Instead of saying, "Why am I alone?" you begin to say, "What are you showing me in this?" Instead of panicking when people leave, you begin to trust that maybe God is protecting you from what they would have brought. Instead of rushing to fill the silence, you learn to let the silence speak. That's where the transformation happens. Solitude is not empty. It's full of clarity, full of revelation, full of God's whisper that gets drowned out in the noise of comparison. It's in solitude that you begin to discover the strength that was buried under your dependency on others. You begin to understand that you are whole even when you're by yourself. You are strong even when you feel unseen. You are enough even when nobody says it out loud. And the moment you stop fearing solitude, you stop fearing abandonment, because you realize you can never be abandoned by the one who promised never to leave you. You are not powerless. You are equipped with divine authority. One of the greatest lies the enemy will try to plant in your mind is the belief that you are weak, that you are helpless, and that you don't have the strength to overcome what's in front of you. He wants you to live as a victim, always waiting on someone else to rescue you, always believing that life is happening to you instead of through you. But the truth is, when God created you, he placed authority inside of you. He didn't just give you survival instincts. He gave you dominion. He gave you resilience. He gave you power to stand against what comes against you. The reason many people don't walk in their authority is because they confuse meekness with weakness. They think that being humble means you have to be walked over. They think that forgiveness means you have to accept disrespect. But authority doesn't cancel humility. Authority doesn't mean arrogance. It means you understand who you are in God and you refuse to live beneath that identity. Authority says, I know I'm chosen. I know I'm protected. I know I have a voice that shifts atmospheres, and I won't let the enemy silence me. When you recognize that you are not powerless, you stop begging for what you already have access to. You stop pleading for love when God already made you lovable. You stop begging for respect when God already crowned you with glory and honor. You stop begging for attention when heaven is already watching over you. Powerlessness makes you chase what's beneath you, but authority makes you rise to what's within you. Think about how many times you felt stuck because you believed you didn't have a choice. You stayed in relationships that broke you because you thought you had to. You tolerated environments that drained you because you believed you couldn't do better. You silenced your own dreams because you thought your voice didn't matter. That's the posture of powerlessness. But the moment you realize God didn't just save you for heaven, He equipped you for earth, you start moving differently. You start making decisions with clarity. You start saying no to what doesn't align with your purpose. You start refusing to settle for less than what God said you could have. The enemy is afraid of you realizing your authority. That's why he distracts you with fear, insecurity, and self-doubt. Because if you ever wake up and recognize the power you carry, you'll stop being intimidated by rejection. You'll stop being paralyzed by failure. You'll stop letting other people's opinions dictate your direction. Authority gives you the boldness to say, even if they walk away, I'll still rise. Even if they don't support me, I'll still move forward. Even if the door closes, I'll knock until another one opens. God never intended for His children to walk around defeated. He said, you are more than a conqueror. He said, no weapon formed against you shall prosper. He said, greater is He that is in you than he that is in the world. That means the very Spirit of God lives inside of you, which means you're never without power. The problem is we forget. We give more weight to what people said about us than what God spoke over us. We give more authority to fear than to faith. We hand over our power to circumstances instead of taking dominion over them. Mental strength means reclaiming what was already yours. It means looking at the storm and saying, peace, be still. It means walking into spaces where people underestimated you and showing up as your full self anyway. It means declaring that you are not powerless, you are not broken, you are not defeated, you are a child of God, and that identity carries authority. You don't have to beg for the bare minimum when God has already given you access to the overflow. Boundaries are proof that you respect yourself. One of the hardest lessons many of us have to learn is that love without limits is not love at all. It's self-abandonment. We think being kind means always being available. We think being loyal means tolerating disrespect. We think being humble means shrinking so other people can shine. But that's not strength, that's self-neglect. Mental strength requires you to draw a line in the sand and say, this is who I am, this is what I deserve, and I will not compromise that just to be accepted. Boundaries are not about pushing people away. They're about protecting the version of you that God is shaping. If you don't guard that version, life and people will drain it out of you before it ever matures. A boundary says, I value the anointing on my life too much to let it be contaminated by chaos. I value my peace too much to let it be disrupted by confusion. I value my purpose too much to waste it in circles where I'm not respected. When you build boundaries, you're not being selfish, you're being a steward. But here's the struggle. When you've lived without boundaries for so long, setting them feels uncomfortable. It feels mean. It feels like rejection. You start worrying about how people will react, whether they'll call you cold or whether they'll walk away. And for some of us, the fear of people leaving keeps us trapped in environments that are slowly killing us. But what if the truth is that the moment you set a boundary, you don't lose people, you discover who was really meant to be there? Because the ones who truly love you will respect the boundary, and the ones who only wanted to use you will resent it. Boundaries are not punishment. They are protection. You're not punishing someone by saying, I can't let you talk to me like that. You're protecting your spirit. You're not punishing someone by saying, I won't be available at all hours of the night. you're protecting your rest. You're not punishing someone by saying, if you can't respect me, you can't have access to me. You're protecting your identity. And the truth is, if you don't protect yourself, nobody else will. People will take as much as you allow them to, and they will keep pulling until there's nothing left. Boundaries are proof that you've grown beyond begging, because when you beg for love, attention, or respect, you let people decide your worth. But when you build boundaries, you're saying, I already know my worth and I refuse to lower it just to make you comfortable. That's what mental strength looks like. It looks like saying no, not because you don't care, but because you care too much about your own health to let yourself be depleted. It looks like walking away, not because you're bitter, but because you know God didn't call you to live broken. Jesus himself had boundaries. He loved everyone, but he didn't give everyone the same level of access. He had the multitudes. He had the 72, he had the 12, and then he had the 3. Even the Son of God understood that intimacy without boundaries is dangerous. And if Jesus needed boundaries, so do you. Boundaries shift the atmosphere of your life. They filter out the voices that keep you small. They protect the dreams God planted in your heart. They create space for healing, for peace, for growth. And every time you enforce one, you're reminding yourself, I am worth protecting. I am worth honoring. I am worth loving the way God intended. Healing your mind means releasing what you cannot control. One of the greatest battles we fight isn't with other people, it's in our own heads. We replay conversations that already ended. We obsess over outcomes we can't change. We carry guilt for decisions we can't undo. And all the while, the weight of control crushes our spirit. We think that if we worry hard enough, stress long enough, or plan perfectly enough, somehow we can prevent disappointment. But that's not healing, that's torment. Healing begins when you finally surrender what was never in your hands to begin with. There's a freedom that comes when you accept that you're not God. You can't make people love you. You can't force them to respect you. You can't control how they show up, what they say, or how they see you. And yet, how often do we exhaust ourselves trying? We bend, we twist, we overgive. We sacrifice our peace, hoping that if we just do enough, someone will finally treat us the way we deserve. But mental strength is knowing when to let go. It's knowing that their actions are not your responsibility. Your responsibility is your heart, your choices, your healing. The enemy loves to keep you trapped in cycles of overthinking because he knows it paralyzes your growth. He knows that as long as your energy is focused on what you can't control, you won't invest that energy into what you can. You can control your response. You can control your boundaries. You can control how you love yourself. But you cannot control the brokenness in someone else's heart, and it is not your job to fix them. Releasing what you can't control is not weakness. It's wisdom. It's looking at life and saying, I can't carry this anymore, but I know the one who can. It's placing the pieces of your worry into God's hands and trusting that his plans are greater than your panic. Healing doesn't mean the memories disappear. Healing doesn't mean you never think about what happened. Healing means you stop letting it dominate your mind. You stop giving it power over your peace. Some of us are sick in our minds because we refuse to let go. We nurse grudges. We hold on to bitterness. We keep records of wrongs as if carrying the pain will somehow protect us from it happening again. But all it does is keep the wound fresh. Mental strength is choosing forgiveness, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve freedom. Forgiveness is a release. It says, I will not let what you did live rent-free in my mind any longer. When you release control, you make space for God to move. As long as you're gripping it tight, trying to force the outcome, you're operating in your own strength. But when you let go, you give God room to do what only he can do. Some blessings are delayed not because God doesn't want to give them, but because your hands are too full of what you refuse to release. The breakthrough you've been praying for might be on the other side of letting go. Healing your mind requires surrender. It requires trust. It requires believing that even if people don't change, even if circumstances don't shift the way you wanted, you will still be okay because your peace is not anchored in perfection. It's anchored in God's presence. You don't have to control every detail to live free. You just have to trust that God is in the details. And once you release what you can't control, you'll find that the heaviness in your mind begins to lift. You'll begin to breathe again. You'll begin to see clearly again. And you'll realize that peace was never about fixing everything around you. It was about healing everything within you. God's love will always fill the void others refuse to. One of the deepest pains a person can carry is the ache of not being loved the way they need it. Maybe it was a parent who couldn't give affection. Maybe it was a friend who betrayed your trust. Maybe it was a partner who never saw your worth. And without realizing it, you've been walking around with empty spaces in your soul, spaces you tried to fill with people, with approval, with validation, with accomplishments. But no matter how much you chase, the void remains because it was never meant to be filled by them. It was meant to be filled by God. When people fail you, it's easy to start believing you're unworthy of love. Their absence feels like
Let's stay connected, stay positive, and grow together. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other. Stay safe, stay inspired, and see you in the next video.